I found the photographs hidden behind my grandmother's false wall 3 days after her funeral, and they changed everything I thought I knew about my family. My grandmother Rose had always been this sweet, quiet woman who baked cookies and knitted scarves. She lived in the same tiny house for 60 years, never talked about her past, and claimed she was an only child from Ohio. When she passed last month, I inherited her house and all her belongings. My cousins didn't want to deal with the cleanup, so it was just me, sorting through decades of accumulated memories. That's when I found the vintage safe. It was hidden behind a false panel in her bedroom closet, painted to match the wall perfectly. I almost missed it completely. The safe was this heavy, 1950s model with intricate metalwork. No one in the family even knew it existed. I spent hours trying different combinations before I finally got it open with her birth date. Inside were documents that made my blood run cold. Birth certificates with different names. Social security cards that didn't match. And dozens of black and white photographs showing my grandmother as a young woman, but she looked completely different. Different hairstyle, different clothes, different life entirely. In one photo, she was standing next to a man in a pinstripe suit outside what looked like a nightclub. In another, she was getting into an expensive car with people I'd never seen before. But the most shocking thing was a letter dated 1953, written in official government letterhead. It was from the U.S. Marshals Service, explaining that Rose Benedetto had been successfully relocated under witness protection and given the new identity of Rose Miller. My grandmother's real name wasn't even Rose Miller. She had testified against some major crime family in Chicago and had to disappear completely. Everything I knew about my family history was a lie. I kept digging through the documents, finding more and more evidence. Bank records showing regular payments from the government. Instructions on maintaining her cover story. Even a photograph of her testifying in what looked like a major court case. My sweet, cookie-baking grandmother had been living a complete fabrication for over 60 years. But then I found something that made me physically sick. There was a newspaper clipping from 1952 about a bombing. 3 people died, including a young mother and her child. The article mentioned that the key witness in the case was Rose Benedetto, whose testimony led to several arrests. But what caught my attention was a handwritten note in the margin: "They know where I am. Moving to California tomorrow." My grandmother had been running from killers my entire life, and none of us knew. I felt this overwhelming mix of grief and betrayal. How could she keep something this massive from all of us? How could she live with this secret every single day? I thought about all the times she seemed nervous when strangers came to the door, how she never wanted to travel, how she always paid in cash for everything. The betrayal hit me like a truck. Every story she told us was fake. Every family tradition was built on lies. She had stolen our right to know who we really were. I was furious. I wanted answers. I wanted the truth about everything. That's when I decided to investigate further. I started researching the case online, cross-referencing the names and dates from her documents. I found old newspaper archives and court records. The crime family she testified against was brutal. They had killed witnesses before. My grandmother wasn't just hiding her past, she was protecting all of us from becoming targets. But I also discovered something incredible. The man in the pinstripe suit from the photographs was my grandfather, my real grandfather. Not the man we called Grandpa Mike, who supposedly died before I was born. This man was still alive. Still in Chicago. Still using his real name. I found his address through public records and decided to contact him. When I called, his voice was shaky. He told me he'd been looking for Rose for 70 years. He thought she was dead. They had been planning to get married when she disappeared into witness protection. She never told him where she went or why. The government wouldn't let her contact anyone from her old life. He had spent 7 decades wondering what happened to the love of his life. I arranged to meet him in Chicago the following week. When I showed him the photographs and documents, he broke down crying. He told me stories about my grandmother that were nothing like the woman I knew. She had been fierce, independent, and incredibly brave. She worked as a bookkeeper for businesses that turned out to be money laundering operations. When she realized what was happening, she gathered evidence and went to the FBI. She saved countless lives by testifying against those criminals. But here's the part that changed everything. He told me my grandmother had a daughter before she went into witness protection. A daughter she had to leave behind with his sister. A daughter who grew up thinking her mother abandoned her. That daughter was still alive. My aunt. Living in Chicago. Never knowing her mother became Rose Miller and started a whole new family. I realized my grandmother didn't betray us, she protected us. Every lie she told kept us safe. Every false story she created gave us a normal life. She sacrificed her own truth so we could live without fear. When I met my aunt, it was like looking at my grandmother 40 years ago. She had the same eyes, the same gestures, the same strength. She told me she'd spent her whole life feeling abandoned and unloved. She never understood why her mother disappeared without explanation. I showed her everything. The documents, the photographs, the truth about witness protection. We both cried for hours, finally understanding the impossible choice my grandmother had been forced to make. Together, we arranged for a proper memorial. Not just for Rose Miller, the grandmother I knew, but for Rose Benedetto, the brave woman who risked everything to do what was right. We invited her original family members who were still alive, connected two families that had been separated for 70 years. My grandmother kept her secrets to protect us, but she also kept us from knowing how incredibly courageous she was. She didn't just bake cookies and knit scarves, she stood up to murderers and saved lives. She lived with the weight of her testimony every single day, never knowing if they'd finally track her down. The betrayal I felt transformed into profound respect. She wasn't lying to hurt us, she was lying to keep us alive. Every false story was an act of love. Every hidden truth was a shield protecting her family. Sometimes the people we think betrayed us actually saved us. Sometimes lies are the most loving thing someone can do. My grandmother's secret wasn't about deception, it was about sacrifice. Have you experienced something like this? Tell me in the comments.